going on, everyone? I'm DarkSidePhil, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where you will get honest, balanced opinions and ratings on the games that I play here on my gaming channel on YouTube, DSPGaming, and you will get maximum truth, minimum video editing. Okay, so today we're going to talk about a game. It's actually a very long-running series, but it's the very first time I've had the opportunity to review one of these games here on YouTube. And it is a game that I feel in some areas actually improves upon its predecessor. In other areas, unfortunately, it follows along the same vein as its predecessor in a bad way. And then in some places, it actually kind of is worse than its predecessor. And the game that we're talking about today is the Japanese role-playing game Final Fantasy XIII-2. The direct sequel, the second direct sequel that Square Enix has ever made for a Final Fantasy game, but direct sequel to Final Fantasy XIII, which upon its release a couple years back had some mixed reviews. Final Fantasy XIII did a lot of things with the Final Fantasy franchise and drastically changed them around, taking it from more of a turn-based style game into almost like a not even as much, nowhere near as much micromanagement as there used to be in the Final Fantasy series. You didn't even necessarily really have to micromanage every action that your character used as long as you put them into what was called a role or paradigm, which is what they're called in these series of games. What this would do is have your character take on a certain role in your party. So maybe you're the medic, you're the healer, so you're just curing everyone in your party of disease, you're healing their wounds, or maybe they're a buff character, so now they're casting extra defensive spells and everything on your party so they take less damage. Or maybe they're the physical attacker, maybe they're using magic. So really it changed the micromanagement aspect of Final Fantasy and made it a lot more of a streamlined system. And lots of controversy surrounding that because a lot of people love the micromanaging of the combat of the Final Fantasy games, because Final Fantasy actually goes along the vein of the same line of games as Dragon Quest, where both of these lines of games used to be very similar. Final Fantasy usually had a little bit more character development, a little bit more epic story, had a better production value, while Dragon Quest was a little bit more on the more anime-ish side. Well, Final Fantasy is completely splintered from what it used to be. And we're going to talk a little bit today about where I think Final Fantasy XIII-2 succeeds, where I think it fails, and overall what I think of this game in relation to the series as a whole and what's happened to the series as a whole, and then I'm going to finally give it a review score. So, Final Fantasy XIII-2 follows the story of Sarah, who is the sister of Lightning, one of the main characters from the original Final Fantasy XIII game, and a brand new character named Noel, who incidentally looks a lot like Sora from Kingdom Hearts. I mean, he's a shoo-in for him. He's even wearing clothes that look like him. So right off the bat, a lot of people panned the game and said, where's the originality? He looks like a character from another popular game. And I really don't even need to go too much into detail of the story, because all of it follows along the story of the ending of Final Fantasy XIII. So if you've played that game, imagine that it's a couple years in the future, and Lightning's missing, no one seems to know where she is. Then you come to find out that there's a time paradox opening up all throughout history, basically, starting from the time of the ending of Final Fantasy XIII until 700 years in the future when the world ends. And so, what the game ends up being is Sarah and Noel, who's actually a person from the year 700 when the world ends. He's one of the last three people from the planet who travels back in time in order to try to fix all these time paradoxes that are opening and eventually save the world. And he has to actually fight his main antagonist, who is Caius, who was also one of the last three people left alive on the planet. And he's actually going through time, creating these time paradoxes, trying to destroy time itself. Now, I'm not going to get too far into the story because it does, near the end of the game, finally explain why he's trying to destroy time itself. It's a pretty stupid reason. And to be completely honest, I could go into detail of the story of this game, but all I need to tell you is this, and this will literally explain everything in this game. It's a time paradox. Someone went through time and changed something, fucked up some part of time, and it's your job to try to fix it. And so what you'll be doing as Noel and Sarah, because by the way, yeah, there's only 2 characters in this game who you can control, Noel and Sarah. You will be going through time, going to different periods of different locales, some of them which you actually did visit in Final Fantasy XIII, and they make a return here. And you'll be attempting to, through a series of events, whether it's fighting a boss who's causing problems because he shouldn't have been there to begin with, whether it's changing some critical thing during that time period, you'll change time, close a time gate or a time rift, and move on to the next locale, another cutscene, and then continue on with the story. And so the whole mystery is what happened to Lightning, where is she? That eventually does get answered, and that's pretty much the story of Final Fantasy XIII-2. In comparison to the story of Final Fantasy XIII, pretty simple, because you're only playing as 2 characters. As opposed to Final Fantasy XIII, you had a wide range of characters from all different walks of life who start off with their own individual stories, eventually converging together, forming one party and coming together for a common cause, and then going towards an end goal. In my opinion, the story of Final Fantasy XIII, the original one, was a little bit more confusing, possibly, than this game, but at the same time, I think the story was better than this game. I think this game, what they tried to do is make the story a lot more simple, focus only on a couple of characters, and try to go along that vein. Okay, I don't even have to tell you about the production values of Final Fantasy XIII-2, because if you've been playing any of these games since they hit the PS2, you know that the production value is extremely high. They put a lot of effort into the musical presentation, the graphical presentation, the environments, the art direction, the cutscenes that are amazing, the overall just everything visually and audibly is amazing with this game, okay? And that's par for the course when it comes to Final Fantasy. It's pretty much always been par for the course when it comes to Final Fantasy. Now, where I think a lot of people will be throwing their hands up and saying, oh, I can't believe they did that, is going to be the gameplay of Final Fantasy XIII-2. Because while they simplifies the plot by only having 2 characters in your party, they've also simplified the gameplay. And when I say that, I mean, okay, in Final Fantasy XIII you had your paradigms where each character played a certain role in your party, sure. But there were certain parts of the game where you still had to micromanage each character. And it wasn't common, but there would be like a tough boss fight where he keeps casting slow on your characters, so you need to have one guy cure that and another guy constantly cast a haste spell, and so you need to do that over and over and over in order to beat that boss. In this game, there is not, and I'm not kidding you, there is not one instance in this game where you need to micromanage your characters. You can just set them in a paradigm role, level them up so they unlock all the abilities of that role, and then just tell them to do what they need to do during a certain part of a boss battle, and you will win. It's that simple. It's not difficult. They have made this game extremely streamlined, and the combat has been basically made easier than Final Fantasy XIII. That being said, if you didn't play the original Final Fantasy XIII, the game actually doesn't do a very good job of explaining paradigms, the fact that you don't really need to micromanage your characters in this game. And I feel that I really steamrolled through this game simply because I played Final Fantasy XIII, which I feel was a lot more difficult than this game, and that I kind of already had my training wheels off when I started playing this, so I started tearing through it. For a newcomer who didn't play Final Fantasy XIII, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to pick up how to play this game. And that's kind of annoying and frustrating, because if the game is easier, you would think, oh, maybe they made the game easier because people complained that Final Fantasy XIII was too hard. But then you don't really explain the game enough so that a newcomer can jump in, so really it's not easier at all. It's actually just as difficult because they're trying to learn this game for the first time. So the only people who really benefit from the game being easier are people who played the original, and for them, they probably don't want an easier game. They've already faced the challenge of the first game, maybe they want a similar challenge. I was looking, honestly, for a more difficult game, and I didn't get it here. I got an easier game. I really felt like this was like Final Fantasy XIII Lite when it came to the gameplay of the combat of the game. The new things that they've added in here that change the gameplay a little bit from the original Final Fantasy XIII, well, when it comes to combat, they have added, instead of having 3 player characters in your party during combat, you'll always have two player characters, Noel and Sarah, and then the third character is a monster which you capture. So yes, they've actually added in a feature similar to Pokemon, where after you defeat certain monsters, they'll join your party. You then can use items that you collect or buy throughout the world to level them up, and then once they're leveled up, they'll gain new abilities, and you can set them as a role, like a Saboteur, a Sentinel, a Medic, a Commando, a Ravager, all these different paradigm roles, and they become the third character of your party. A little frustrating because the cool part about Final Fantasy XIII, again, was that there were such a wide cast of characters. In this game, because you have a monster as your third character, it's only 2 people ever really involved with the story. Of course, then you have the main villain and what's going on with Lightning, even though you barely follow her in this game. So, really, they think that it's a cool improvement to have a monster in your party. I actually think it's a detriment. I would have preferred to have a third player character who I could develop myself, and I was a little bit frustrated that that wasn't available. Well, another new thing that is each monster basically maxes out an ability, similar to like the limit breaks from Final Fantasy VII, or any of these Final Fantasy games where you build up a meter, all of a sudden it fills and you can do a devastating attack. Well, the monsters have these abilities, and everyone is different. So if it's a medic monster, he'll probably end up healing your whole party. If it's a magic monster, they'll probably do a multiple level magical attack. And so all of that, you know, is what they consider the new gameplay here. Another new thing is that there is a character, Mog the Moogle, makes a return to the Final Fantasy series. There's absolutely no explanation where he came from. You don't understand how he's able to morph into a weapon that Sarah uses throughout the game. You don't know how Lightning got him, because what ends up happening is Lightning finds it, or has him, and gives him to Sarah to use. There's no explanation whatsoever. You have no idea where the fuck he came from or why he's even involved. But he's there for comic relief. He's always bumbling around. Sometimes he runs into things. But really, primarily, what he's there for is to find items. What you do is there are invisible items throughout the world that if you hold down a button, he will reveal those items to you. You can also throw him and he can retrieve items. If there's like a chest, or in these games it's not a chest, it's like a floating ball. But if it's further away and you can't really reach it, you can throw him and he'll get that item for you. So there's a little bit more of an exploration aspect to the game where you're looking for hidden treasures and trying to figure out where you can throw them out to open up treasures. And that is part of the gameplay. But the primary change and the primary difference between Final Fantasy XIII and XIII-2 is the style of the game. A lot of people complained about Final Fantasy XIII, saying that it wasn't like a traditional Final Fantasy game, meaning it was very, very linear. For about 80% of the game, you were forced to just go through this long and lengthy story, which was over 20 hours long, and you couldn't veer off of this path. You had to just do this series of events. And then finally, at one point in the game, it becomes open world, and for some people that was frustrating because they said, well, I just want to beat the game. Well, guess what? You couldn't. You actually then had to go out in this open world and grind for hours on end, doing side missions and optional things in order to get high enough level to finally go back to the linear story and beat the game. Well, Final Fantasy XIII-2 is completely different. Right from the get-go, after you do the first, I think the first couple sets of missions, after the first couple hours of gameplay, you will be presented with side missions that are completely optional that you can choose to do whether or not you want to. And completing side missions obviously will lead to more fighting enemies, which will lead to more grinding and getting extra levels, but also you'll find optional items which might open up optional time gates, which take you to completely optional versions of the main quest line locales. So you might be in the year 300 at one location, you find an optional item, you can go to the year 100 at that location and do a whole bunch of side missions there. So there is a lot more optional gameplay, a lot more open. It's a kind of an open world compared to Final Fantasy XIII right from the get-go, and I think that was really the one area where Square Enix did listen to the players and fans and said, okay, well, since everyone complained about the 20-hour story that was mandatory before you could go open world in Final Fantasy XIII, we'll make you be able to do optional stuff a lot more earlier in Final Fantasy XIII too. So, I'm gonna go off on a mini rant here about the Final Fantasy series, okay? And the reason is because I am so frustrated that now in modern times in 2012, okay, this game is called Final Fantasy because this game, in my opinion, is not a Final Fantasy game. Neither was Final Fantasy XIII, neither was Final Fantasy XII, neither was Final Fantasy X. The Final Fantasy series of games were always focused on a very strong story with unique characters who had multi-level character development. You would find out about their origins, where they came from, their past. You would begin to care about these characters as they developed throughout the story of the game. And then there would always be an epic style ending to every Final Fantasy game. The big ultimate good versus evil showdown battle at the end of the game, and then a nice lengthy long ending with a cool resolution. You get to find out what happens to all of your favorite characters after the game, simply because in previous times, before Final Fantasy X, whenever there was a Final Fantasy game, that was it. That was the Final Fantasy. There wasn't going to be a sequel. That was the final game for those characters, and that was it. There was never going to be a sequel or spin-off where you get more information about those characters, and therefore it was like they needed to put the effort in to really let you know what happens in the story at the end of the game. Square Enix has completely taken Final Fantasy and changed it into a completely different entity whatsoever. This game is more about showy graphics, high production values and music, and nothing about the story. The stories, in my opinion, of Final Fantasy XIII and XIII-2 are throwaway stories. They're overly convoluted. They don't make a lot of sense. Even after you play the game multiple times and you do the research, they're still kind of hard to grasp. The characters are boring as fuck. I would rather watch grass grow than talk to any of the characters in these games for more than a minute. They have boring backstories. Some of them don't have any backstories. They're dumb as dirt. They all, they smile, they pose, they overact. They're really bad overactors. And it's just horrible. Some of the worst dialogue ever has been spoken in the most recent Final Fantasy games, as opposed to the old ones. Some of the most epic dialogue ever said in video games ever. You spoony bard. And yeah, I know that's a fucking mistranslation, but that was fucking cool. And I'm mad that these games have lost that epic flair. When I played this game, I didn't think, oh man, I'm playing the next installment in this epic series anymore. I said, I'm going to play another fucking rehash of this stupid Final Fantasy engine. It's probably just a cheap cash-in, and you know, it's going to be more of the same, and I'm really not going to like the story of the characters, and that is the real case here. I didn't latch on to Noel or Sarah. I think both of them are boring as fucking shit. I think that the antagonist, Caius, is a stupid bore. He looks more like a David Bowie wannabe fighting with the fucking Soul Edge than being an interesting enemy. Lightning, who's probably the most interesting character in this game, is barely even fucking in it, and really doesn't have anything to do with most of the story for most of the game. So, what the fuck? Let's make a sequel to a game where we try to establish interesting characters and take most of them out of it, and they only show up for stupid, short cameo appearances. What the fuck were they thinking? I don't know. This game doesn't hold a candle to the original Final Fantasies on Nintendo, Super NES, or PlayStation 1, and it's a travesty that the series has gone this way. All that being said, I have to be objective. And I have to realize that this game has to be rated fairly on a scale of the other games that I've played and the other games that are out. What you have to understand is just going through the story of this game is over 20 hours long. There's lots of optional side quests that could pretty much double or triple the length of the gameplay, depending on how much time you want to put into it. The production values are very high, and maybe there are some people who would really enjoy this really Western-style story, or I'm sorry, not Western, but Japanese-centric story with these kind of generic anime-ish characters who overact and are really fucking boring. Maybe some people like that story. I don't know. But I certainly don't. Being that I'm a fan of the original Final Fantasy games that were so much fucking better than this one. And so, for me, I have to be objective when I rate this game. I'll say it's not a bad game. For $60, you're going to get a lot of gameplay out of this game. If you were a little bit pissed off that the Final Fantasy XIII was too linear, this game will be up your alley. However, if you're looking for an improved story, better characters, you're not going to get it here. It's the same shallow bullshit. And the one major gripe that everyone who bought this game and put a lot of time into it is having right now with the game, very simply put, the game does not have a full ending. At the end of Final Fantasy XIII-2, the game says, "To be continued." It has a cliffhanger ending, and basically expects that you are going to buy further DLCs down the line to get the actual ending of the game. Final Fantasy XIII, with all of its flaws, the fact that the story was overly convoluted, the characters were boring, the gameplay drastically changed after 20 hours of linearity and made you grind, out of all that, I can tell you, with all the time I spent on that game, it had a solid ending. I actually thought the ending explained things and wrapped it up well. This game says, fuck you to the gamer. Square Enix says, thanks for your $60. Fuck you. Pay us more money down the line if you actually want to know what's going on in the ending of this game. We don't give a damn about you, so fuck you and pay us more money. And that is a spitting in the face of the modern gamer. That is absolutely ridiculous when you invest hours upon hours into a long, lengthy RPG like this and you don't get a true ending. That's fucking bullshit. And they are to be I'm calming down. I don't want to get too angry, but overall, bad story, boring characters, but pretty good gameplay. The gameplay was, in my opinion, it was changed from Final Fantasy XIII. Some people will like it better because it's easier. Some people will be disappointed because it's not as difficult. I was one of those people, but I can see why some people would like it a little bit better. The ability to recruit monsters and put them in your party is kind of neat, even though for me it's a detriment because I like the combat of having a third character who I can design for myself a little bit better than having a monster who has limited development, but that's just my personal preference. But super duper high production values, and you are going to get at least 20 hours minimum, if not more, gameplay out of this game with the potential to go 40 to 60 hours if you do all the optional content. It's a mixed bag. Final Fantasy XIII-2 is a mixed bag, and in relation to everything that I've played recently, I'm going to have to give Final Fantasy XIII-2 a 6.75. That's right. Now remember, my rating scale is on a 1 to 10 basis, and it is very strict. If I give a game above a 5, it means it's above average. If I give a game below 5, it means it's below average, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily unplayable. And a 6.75, what it's basically saying is it's better than the average RPG, okay? An average RPG would be if they didn't put any effort in. And the production values and the attempts that they did make to try to improve from Final Fantasy XIII do give this game some added value, okay? And the fact also that you're going to get so many hours of gameplay out of it. But the fact that the characters are boring, the story is boring, the story doesn't have a fucking ending, the game's too easy compared to the last one, but too hard for newcomers because the tutorials suck, is a massive detriment to the game. And I can't give it a 7. I can't even give it a 7 and say that it's a great game, because remember, 7 and above would be pretty good, great. I can't say that. It's really not. It's just going through the motions. For me, I enjoyed it because it continues the story off of Final Fantasy XIII-2. If I hadn't played Final Fantasy XIII, I probably would have fucking hated this game because I wouldn't have known how to play it and I wouldn't have understood any of the story going on. So, it is what it is. I give Final Fantasy XIII-2 a 6.75. Could have been a lot better. It is a disappointment to me, and I really hope that they cut off this bullshit trying to milk us now with DLCs to get an ending, and instead they fucking go back to square one, start writing good stories with interesting characters with great development, and then add in some gameplay. Like, you have to have a good story before you can have a game, and the stories of these games have been shit recently. So go hire some fucking writers of people who know what the fuck they're doing before you make the next Final Fantasy game, you stupid fucking hacks at Square Enix. I'm done ranting now. I really hope that things turn around. I don't know if they will for Final Fantasy, but I'm disappointed. Growing up with the classics was so much better than this bullshit, and it's just ridiculous that they're pissing away the name of Final Fantasy at this point. Okay, so that's it for the Hateful Truth game review. I hope you found it informative. I hope you found it interesting, and now you know whether or not to judge if you want to actually check out this game. And I hope you will join me next time when, again, I give you maximum truth and minimum editing in my Hateful Truth game reviews. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you later.